Hi, I'm Faye, and I'm here to help you learn the fundamentals in a smart way, which removes a lot of the frustrations you might encounter. This is the final video on the figure. In the previous video, I talked about the key concepts of measuring for proportion and shading. I also gave some resources that you can use to study them, and a quick overview of exercises that you can do. But in this video, I'll be showing in depth how to put everything that we learned into practice, so you can implement everything into your drawings. All using active learning, of course. If you don't know what are the key concepts of active learning, you can learn more by watching this video. In the end, I'll share some of the drawings on my progress that got me to where I am now, so that you can know what to expect. And after you're done with your practice, you can submit your drawings for me to give feedback and review. The link for the form will be in the description, as well as the links for all of the resources that I'm using here. And without further ado, let's dive right in. In step 1, we're going to start by shading the same volumes that we did in form. You can start with step 2 if shading is difficult for you, but the most useful will be the type of drawings we did in step 3, which is the complete form with all the joints, hands, and feet. As you can see, we're only going to apply the core shadow for now, and you can add a little bit more shading like I'm doing in the end, as long as it's one uniform value. But in this step, I really just want you to focus on the plane changes and on the core shadow. We're going to do all of this in a hatching style, and in the first example, I show you how to do it horizontally to the form, so you can see I'm choosing the longest axis to shade. In the other examples, I'm going to shade horizontally, so across from the form. You can combine both, as you will see me doing in the end, but you can also try to practice with each one. And I'm not doing tiny individual strokes like in traditional hatching, I'm just doing large and thick strokes. This is a simpler and faster way because, again, the point is to focus on the plane changes, and hatching is great for that, but we're not focusing on the hatching itself. And again, we're doing just the core shadow too. After you shade using the drawings you already had, you can do new drawings using the measuring techniques I mentioned in the previous video. I'm not going to show iteration here because I want to keep these videos short, but you can do level 1, 2, or 3 of iteration to practice. If you don't know what that is, it's part of the step-by-step guide I have to learn the fundamentals in a smart way. You can check the video in the cards. And for drawing from imagination, I'm combining 2 references, which is level 2 imagination, but I'm trying to do it by not looking at the reference. Unfortunately, I only remember to record a while later, so you missed most of the action, but the concept is the same. Apply only the core shadow, hatching horizontally or vertically. In step 2, we're going to try to clean our drawings by removing all of the construction lines and also adding the cast shadow. To achieve that, we can start with very light underdrawings and erase what still shows through. I'm not a fan of erasing a lot, so as you can see, I try to go as light as possible, but do what works best for you. I'm starting with the gesture, so I'm still thinking about the things we learned in the previous videos, but I'm adding the new things on top. So to maintain that proportion, I'm trying to measure with angles, compare these parts, and looking at the negative space. My biggest issue is that I draw the legs too long, so it's something I have to keep in mind and constantly correct, as you're going to see. I like to first figure out the proportions before adding the shadows, so the first part of my drawing is just measuring and trying to get the proportions to be as accurate as possible. Then I'm going to focus on shading, and again, we're only going to do the core shadow and then add the cast shadow as well. I'm keeping in mind whether the core shadow should be sharp or soft depending on how soft the transition between planes is. So on her belly, I'm keeping it very soft, but on her arms, for example, I'm doing it sharper. The cast shadow is very sharp too in this light. And I'm focusing more on the torso because the rest is in too much shadow, so I'm just going to apply a generic light shading to the legs. I'm skipping iteration again so this doesn't stay too repetitive, but let me know if you prefer that I show the iterations. Anyways, now we're doing imagination level 3, which is completely from imagination without any references in mind. Still, I end up doing something slightly similar to the previous drawing, like the direction of the shadow and the pose is somewhat similar, but I'm going to also add some things of my own. So I'm starting with the gesture, defining the proportions first and then adding the shadows for the torso, but I leave the legs for last without drawing them completely. Only later do I come back to them. And of course, I draw the legs way too long. In step 3, we're going to add as much shading as we can, though we don't want to force ourselves too much and end up with shading in places where it shouldn't go, because that will result in dirty or muddy looking drawings, or even just wonky looking drawings. You know the drill by now, start with gesture, find the proportions, and then shade, but here I'm going to do a few more things. I'm still starting with just the core shadow and cast shadow, and I like to start with a light shadow as well and slowly bring that value darker. It's very common that your first shading will look flat because you won't go dark enough, so doing multiple darkening passes is a good way to combat that. I also like to focus on one place at a time, like first the legs, then the belly, then the arms. I don't always follow this order though, whatever comes easier to me at the time. You can see me smudging the drawing now, and that's why I use watercolor pencils. They smudge enough to give it a nice effect, but not too much that your drawings will look blurry, so it's my favorite tool for shading. And you can see I'm not outlining everything either, and I'm reserving the darkest outlines to the parts I see are darker in the reference or that I want to give more emphasis to. My shadings aren't super realistic and I'm not sure I want to get there. I like when things look more artistic, but I know that as I cycle through these steps, I'll be better able to identify it and add more detail and shadows. For now though, this is what I can do. I'll only be showing a very short demonstration for imagination for time's sake, so this is level 1 imagination, which is recalling. If I could shade like this from imagination level 3, I'd be extremely happy. For now though, I'm working towards getting there. I'm starting with recalling level 1 and working my way towards level 3. So even if you can't draw completely from imagination, there are still ways in which you can practice. Remember, you can take some quick peeks at the original if you're having a hard time remembering it, but try to work towards not having to look. As you can see, drawings from imagination will look worse than drawings from reference at first, and that's fine, we'll improve over time. And I wanted to show some of my old drawings for you to see the progress and know what to expect. In the span of 2 months, I went from doing terrible shading to slowly trying to figure out core shadow and cast shadow, reflect light, and all of that. You can see the first cycle I did, I only went as far as step 2, but in the second cycle that I'm now, I can add a lot more detail and do step 3. I'm sure I'll continue to grow as I study and practice. Now that you've seen how to do it, go ahead and get practicing. Copy the demonstrations, do the different levels of iteration and imagination, always cycling through the steps so you don't get stuck. And don't forget to submit your drawings for feedback. The next fundamental that we're going to study now is portrait drawing, so make sure to come back for that. Anyways, if you have any feedbacks or problems, please leave them in the comment section below. I'll be more than happy to help you. And if you found this video useful, please consider sharing it with other artists, liking, subscribing, all of that good stuff. And thank you so much for watching.